thank you so much for joining us. This is Worldview, where we tell you the African story in the context of world affairs. I'm Conrad Kakraba. This evening, we are going to be looking at Obama's visit to Africa, and specifically taking a look at his speech to the African Union leaders, and basically some of the matters arising from the speech. And so U.S. President Barack Obama ended his visit to Africa cautioning the leaders against staying in power for too long. And he said this does not augur well for development. He said democracy is more than just holding elections, and he called on the AU to ensure that leaders respect their constitutions and step down when their term ends, citing Burundi, whose president, Pierre Nkurunziza, has controversially been re-elected for a third term. He also called for an end to the canker of corruption, saying it is the key to unlock Africa's economic potential, because the money can be used to create jobs, build schools and hospitals. And Mr. Obama was speaking at the AU headquarters in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, the first time a sitting U.S. president has addressed the body. And so we would be speaking with an international news analyst, Iribad Ibrahim, and he will be giving us perspective on the issue. And then we'll also come back to the studio, and then I have a guest with me, Patrick Stevenson, to also analyze some of the issues that came up in the speech by Obama. Let's go on the line now and speak to Iribad Ibrahim. Hello, Iribad. Yes, hello, good evening, and thanks for joining us. Yeah, so give me an overview of Obama's speech to the African Union.
Yeah, hello.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. And then I was asking, give us a brief summation of Obama's speech to the African Union.
Con, I went through the pains of perusing the full transcript of the message. It runs into quite a number of pages. And His Excellency, the President of the single most strongest country in the world, Barack Obama, spoke on a wide range of issues. And there were a few sticking points of great relevance to Ghana, as well as all other countries within the sub-region. I was quite excited when Obama mentioned the League of Countries where there is smooth democracy. He didn't only mention Botswana and South Africa, but he also mentioned Ghana and Sierra Leone. So I believe it's a feather in the cap of West Africa that the most powerful country in the world that has got all the intelligence, that has gathered all the pieces of information available, would rank Ghana as one of the most viable and vibrant democracies on the continent. So that kind of stood out for me. And vis-a-vis the freedom of expression, he copiously quoted from the AU Charter. He called for the need for freedom of expression and professional people like you who are in the field of journalism to take the truth to the general masses and serve as ombudsmen between the general masses and the ruling class. He also mentioned various areas of cooperation. He mentioned AGWA, which is a long-standing arrangement between the U.S. and Africa. And as president, he has renewed it for the next 10 years to ensure the Growth and Opportunity Act, which is the AGWA, would reach as many Africans as possible. He also mentioned the YALI, and every young promising African knows about YALI, Young African Leadership Initiative, what is under the aegis of the U.S. State Department. And they cherry-pick promising Africans from various countries, including Ghana, and they take you to the U.S. for a short training, so that you would impart whatever leadership skills you would have accrued over the period to your people. And Obama believes it is only through such exchange of expertise and knowledge that would be able to lift this continent from the current doldrums it finds itself. And he states quite categorically that Africa's future will be in the hands of the next generation. And it is estimated that the population of the continent will double in the next decade, and many of those people would be below 18 years. So Obama mentioned the proliferation of ICT technology on the continent. He mentioned the millions of mobile phones that are accessed by various Africans, and mentioned, social media, the internet, as avenues that would create the needed free flow and ebb of information that would help the next generation of Africans. He also mentioned areas where Africa has excelled. HIV was a serious issue about 2 decades ago, but the number of people with HIV is close to zilch on the continent, which is a great achievement or a feat for the African Union's initiative in partnering with the United Nations. But there were other low points. His Excellency, the President of the United States, mentioned. Chief among them is the fact that there are 6 tight leaders on the continent, leaders that have been at post for the past 3 decades or so. You can make mention of Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. You can mention Paul Biya of Cameroon. You can mention a couple of other leaders, Idris Deby of Chad and all that. And it was quite a tense moment when Obama made that clear, point that they need to give way so that the younger generation could also have a shot at the presidency. The applause actually came from civil society organizations that were in the hall, but there was eerie silence, meaning that the AU has still not come to terms with the fact that longevity in most cases does not necessarily translate into national development for most African countries. And it's an idea that was mooted by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama at the ECOWAS level before he handed over to Macky Sall of Senegal. But when he made that point, certain leaders within the sub-region kicked against it. Yahya Jammeh of the Gambia, Faure Gnassingbé of Togo. These are 6 tight leaders that have no limit whatsoever on how many 10 years the president can continue to rule any African country. And Obama made the strongest point in that regard when he said at his age, he is still young and exuberant. If he so wished, he would want to continue to be the president of the U.S., but he understands that you need to give way for fresh ideas, fresh energies, and you leave the stage while the applause is loudest. And I think that was a very strong point, which really went down well. And if there was any single most important point President Obama mentioned during his address, I think that was it. But he mentioned other areas, that Africa should not be a partner in aid, but Africa should be an equal partner in terms of trade. The quantum of trade there is between America and Africa is usually one of parasitism rather than symbiotism. We go there for donor aid. There is very little to show for exchange of expertise. Whenever you hear of EPA or any such agreement between America and Africa, it's about us opening the floodgates for them to plunder and pillage our natural resources, or we travel there as laborers. There are many Ghanaians that have graduated from university, just like all other African countries, with very little opportunities in their country. They travel and they do menial jobs. They work as laborers to build the infrastructure of the first world. Obama says with this address, he thinks this is a watershed moment for there to be a significant or seismic shift in that status quo, so that when African leaders sit with our partners from the first world, they will sit as equals in partnership and development rather than the cap in hand kind of scenario we have all the time. And that did it for me. It nailed it for me as an individual. We need to even the playing field so that negotiations are based upon the goodies you bring to the table.
Right.
These white countries don't have natural resources. They have the expertise. We have the natural resources, and therefore we shouldn't allow ourselves to be treated as underdogs and sign lopsided agreements with the first world.
Interesting.
So all in all, I think Obama sought to create a picture that he's one of us. Faith is only what has, precipitated his becoming the president of the most powerful country of the world. And he believes, just as he has excelled as a person with the African genes running through him, young Africans like you and me can rise up to the occasion and lift this continent from the penury it is living in to the station of prosperity.
Great. Thank you so much for that overview of Obama's address to the African leaders during his visit to Africa. And he went to the Addis Ababa for that. Thank you so much, Iribad Ibrahim, for your time. And so that was Iribad Ibrahim, an international news analyst, giving us a rundown of some of the highs and lows of Obama's speech to the African leaders. And so there were a lot of issues, and Patrick Stevenson is here to also help us understand some of the issues that were raised. Particularly, let's look at the issue of democracy, development, corruption, and then the security and all. And then first of all, Mugabe was absent. Why was he? He's the president of the African Union.
Well, certainly. You know that, I mean, historical antecedents in the past 2-3 years have not been too sound, if I can say that, between good old Bob and then the U.S. as an institution. I'm not too sure it's anything personal against the persona of Barack Obama. I think Mugabe, we know, has always entered the West, entered the U.S., but I feel that anytime you interrogate the position of Mugabe on some of these issues, I mean, vis-a-vis the context he finds himself, and certain decisions he's made, I think sometimes it exposes some bit of dishonesty, if I can say that, intellectually, because on one breath, Mugabe is almost always against any kind of decision or engagement that is coming from the West that appears to suggest some way, somehow, certain things that either affect his presidency either affect him as a president of Zimbabwe or his position in the African Union, or how long he's even been serving. On those counts, Mugabe has been quite outspoken on them, that he's not prepared to have those engagements. I mean, his position even on issues of human rights, particularly on gay rights, for example, is quite clear. But, I mean, if you decide to take such bold political stance, my ordinary thinking would be that when it comes to things like economic development and how you mobilize resources, because first of all, before you get a mouth to speak up for yourself as a country, you should have necessarily the economic willpower to do so. But when you go begging, when they offer you free aid for health care, for supporting your economy and things like that, and you accept them, yet you don't want to swallow the pills that come with them, and it exposes you, right? So you're okay when it is money they're giving you, but you're not okay when it is reform or some kind of structure.
Okay.
And so
you think all of those things played into his absence?
All of those are factors, really. And I think, for me, what would even be surprising would be the call that Obama made when he was in Kenya.
Okay.
African leaders should think beyond just their tenure. I mean, we can't have presidents who are ruling countries for more than 3 decades. It means if you have a young man who's 35 years old, ever since he was born, all he's known in Zimbabwe, for example, this is President Robert Mugabe. I mean, that's just not sound. That's not to suggest that democracy itself, a change in presidency and change in government, necessarily will add the right value that you're looking for to any economy. Because clearly, the Southeast Asians and some other countries, if historical antecedents are supposed to serve as right, would show that there have been cases where people have either oppressed certain regimes and have not really implemented these principles, but have been able to deliver the economic goods that we're looking for at the end of it. For me, that's key. It so happens that in our part of the world, okay, longevity has not translated into economic development for most of the African countries. If you take Lee Kuan Yew, for example, I mean, he was long serving in office, but it translated some way, somehow, to the goods we're looking for. If you go back into our own historical antecedents, like the days of Nkrumah, for instance, some belief that if he had stayed longer, I mean, the evidence could suggest otherwise, but there's the belief that if he had stayed longer, it could have. And so it's really mixed. But
interesting. And here's something that Mugabe's spokesperson is reported as saying. He said Mugabe actually believes that Obama is just another visitor. So he's coming to Africa. It's just a visit by another visitor. So there was nothing so flamboyant about it that he should be present. And, you know, he says that Mugabe does not run the AU Center. Obama has come to Ethiopia for an official visit and to address the staff there. And there are many dignitaries who come to the AU headquarters. And you can imagine if all come wanting President Mugabe's input, you know, so to him, it's why should he be there?
Well, I mean, yeah, Mugabe has a position. That's what I'm saying, that if you interrogate the position of Mugabe on some of these issues, I mean, it exposes some level of intellectual dishonesty, if you ask me, rather, really. Because this is not just anybody. Okay. First of all, he's a president of the United States. Not that that should matter, okay? I'm not saying that should necessarily matter, but he is not. He came to visit Africa. Okay, he's been to Kenya, where we're made to understand he has some
ancestral
some ancestral
connections. Yeah.
Now he's visiting the African Union. Okay, you are the president of the Union. We can have so many visitors that visit the African Union. That's fine. Is Mugabe telling us that if this was Xi Jinping from China, he was not going to be present? Is he telling us that if it was the chair of the European Union, he was not going to show up? I mean, I find some of these positions quite
interesting. Let's leave him alone, and then let's talk about the issue of the fact that Obama was so forthright in saying that, I mean, people should really follow the constitutions that govern their countries, I mean the leaders. So he was citing himself as an example, the fact that he would have loved to, you know, continue to stay in power because he thinks he's a pretty much, I mean, good president, but his constitution would not allow, and so he won't dare.
Because in Obama's country, which has been practicing democracy for more than 250 years, they understand what you mean by rule of law, that a country and its people should be governed, first of all, by rules.
So we don't understand that.
I'm not too sure what the context in the US would have been immediately after they signed their constitution in the 1860s. I'm not too sure if immediately after that they had it that smooth and everybody understood that we vote you to 1 term or 2 terms and you're going to be out. There are bound to be challenges here and there. I am not covering up for African leaders. But
so you think that is because our democracies are still very nascent, and therefore we should be given some kind of...
They're nascent, they're young, they're young, they're nascent and all of that. But you see, it is for that reason that you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. Because other countries may have started, we might have practiced other forms of social and economic governance. Some have been extremely autocratic, they have delivered the goods. I mean, the end point of any kind of social organization and economic institution is to deliver public goods and services so that the ordinary citizenry can be happy and excited about it. And so I'm not too sure if how old the democracy is really the argument we should be building to leave African leaders to perpetuate themselves in office. I'm not sure that's my position, but I'm saying that they might not have gotten it right themselves right from inception. But we in Africa don't need to go and reinvent the wheel. At least we know that in some of these jurisdictions, challenges have erupted when leaders have decided to stay beyond their tenures, particularly when they are not delivering the goods. There's evidence of high levels of corruption. This was stated by the likes of Max Weber way back, that anytime you decide to create a political institution, public institution, you're going to get corruption. This is like 300 years ago. There's going to be corruption as some kind of offshoot. And so you needed right systems and strategies to deal with corruption. We haven't gotten that right. And so when you have about 1/3 of the leaders in Africa today haven't been in office for more than 10 years, that's a worrying phenomenon. Okay, particularly when they themselves, you find those leaders have some kind of, I wouldn't want to call a group, they tend to support themselves. If you see what has been happening in Mugabe, if you see what is happening in Kagame's Rwanda, for example, if you see what is happening in Uganda, I mean, these guys appear to support themselves some ways. I'm not saying kicking them out of office necessarily is a bad thing, but if they have enacted for themselves certain principles and rules of governance, like we are seeing, for example, in Burundi, we have all agreed that as far as tenure of office of any president is concerned, we just have maybe two terms of 5 years per term. Once you are done with that, irrespective of whether the people called for you to stay in office or because clearly you're going to have people that support you. So it only makes sense that naturally there's going to be a section of the population who would ordinarily believe, irrespective of what the incentives might be. The incentives could be that you're actually doing the right thing. It could be that you're handing money out to, we know how some of these things work in some of these countries. Irrespective of whether the people call for it or not, it's up to you to know that you're being governed by a certain law. And that law, you have all agreed, is going to provide a certain tenure of office that you should be, you should run.
Okay, interesting. Let's look at economic development and the issues that he came up with quickly, and then especially focusing on aid and the fact that we don't need to do the kind of master-servant relationship any longer. We now need to be partners in our economic, development efforts.
So what's the policy strategy behind that? I never heard that one. I mean, every now and then we've had leaders tell us that Africa is tired of aid. I'm one of those anti-aiders because I think that the graft, the theft, the corruption, the lack of accountability that we have in Africa today extensively is you have foreign aid, the free monies that these governments get, that ends up creating that enabling environment for them to perpetuate these activities. Truth of the matter is that if you have a government like Burundi, like what you have in Burundi, that is not appears unaccountable to the people, and yet still gets tons and tons of foreign aid. If we saw Burkina Faso under Blaise Compaoré for 27 years, didn't we? I mean, it got extensive support from the European Union and the US and some other Western countries. Indeed, questions have been asked even about US foreign policy towards Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and some other countries that it appears as though the tax money that we take from the people in the West ends up in people's pockets. If we shortlist rich people in Africa today, you'll be surprised that you're going to find some of them in public service and politics. And I ask myself, what value is created in public service that makes a president or relative of a president who don't do any other private business that adds value or generates value, necessarily rich people in the country? It just doesn't make sense. If you go to Congo today, not Congo, Dos Santos' country today, I mean, his daughter is estimated to be about $3 billion rich. See. I mean, and I don't know what work she really does. That's Angola. I don't really know what work she does. The allegations that she kind of inside private checks, but that's on another day. And so my point is that we have heard things about foreign aid. Clearly, it does not necessarily help us, particularly aid that is supposed to engender socioeconomic development. It doesn't.
So what should be happening?
If it's humanitarian aid, if we have a crisis in Darfur, for example, and we have to send food, of course all of us in Sub-Saharan Africa will support.
So you think that if there are situations that people are in dire need of help,
why not?
In terms of the fact that maybe there is an outbreak of a disease, or maybe aid that is channeled into fighting HIV and AIDS, or maybe something that that it will go to alleviate poverty, help the people.
Who supports the US to fight HIV/AIDS?
They also have their own systems of getting funding for all of these.
Who supports China to fight HIV/AIDS? Who supports China to fight malaria? The point is that you first of all need to solve that fundamental economic problem. You don't fix it, it doesn't bring you to the table to resolve issues like healthcare, like security, like education. It just doesn't. It doesn't work that way. We can't skip the gun and say we want to go solve education when we don't have the money to do it. Which means step one, fix the economy, make sure there's sufficient participation by it's broad-based. You bridge things like income inequality, people are actually having jobs, you're adding value, you're decreasing unemployment. When that happens, I wouldn't mind paying tax. That means the government wouldn't have a problem raising domestic revenue. The government is not going to have a problem providing health care. The government will not have a problem providing education. It won't have a problem putting instructors to deal with HIV/AIDS. In the US, Haiti, didn't it get hit? It got hit, right? Didn't we have donors and other humanitarian agencies supporting them? You can't be an island on your own as a country. I'm saying that there are certain disasters that as a country you're necessarily going to get help for. We are a global community, and so such humanitarian support I'm not against. But where you want to put a budgetary support into the public purse of a certain government institution, and there's ample amount of evidence to suggest that public purse is leaking by close to 48 or 50%, it makes absolutely no sense to do it. Because you only create a disincentive. Look at the number of African countries that have been toppled over in the last 10 years, the number of coups that we've had. Okay, attempts by certain governments to perpetuate themselves in office, either by trying to massage constitutions or whatever it is. We've seen lots of those. Look at South Sudan today. Okay, and so for me, the issue about aid, Africa has got to be very up and coming with it. The leaders have got to realize that it's not going to help them, and they need the right fundamental strategies that resolve economic problems rather than depending on somebody's tax money to support them. Clearly, as I speak to you today, the global financial architecture is changing. If you go to places where donors were quite instrumental in supporting Africa in terms of providing finance, a lot of them are changing today. If you go to Denmark, as I speak to you, they have a change in government. The left government that's in office now clearly has cut support. Now, when that happens, it means you in Africa, you have natural resources. You need to strengthen things like natural resource governance and make sure that the resources are being invested in programs and projects that add value to the economy and can sustain development. And so Obama is spot on. We don't need aid. We need trade.
Okay.
Don't bring us trade agreement, free trade agreements that ensures or creates the enabling environment for the West to dump their products in Africa and cripple our emerging industries. Don't do that. But it will also mean that our African leaders will have to understand the agenda for their respective countries and the agenda for the continent at large.
Here's a quote from him. He said, instead of just sending aid to build power plants, our Power Africa initiative is mobilizing billions of dollars in investments from governments and businesses to reduce the number of Africans living without electricity. Now, an undertaking of this magnitude would not be quick, and it will take many years, but working together, I believe we can bring electricity to more than 60 million African homes and businesses and connect more Africans to the global economy. And instead of just telling Africa you are on your own in dealing with climate change, we are delivering new tools and financing to more than 40 African nations to help themselves prepare and to adapt. And similar statements that he was making, that America's approach generally has changed, you know, in terms of development and how they focus, you know, in engaging Africa rather than just trying to help Africa. You know, so I think
America's position
is quite clear.
Is changing. I wouldn't necessarily think that it is changing because the African strategies are changing or because the context is changing. It's changing because the Southeast Asians have changed their strategy.
And he was even welcoming, he was welcoming any other countries that want to deal with Africa. He said, you know, any other country.
So that's a geopolitical talk.
You think so?
It's a geopolitical talk.
Because, why?
Because
do you think he doesn't want any country else to participate?
The IMF, the World Bank, the European
talking about
Union,
the Chinese?
The US were not interested previously in things like investment in sound infrastructure that adds value to local economies in Africa. They weren't. Okay, you go to the World Bank, the IMF is only giving you budgetary support that supports recurrent expenditure, payment of salaries, fiscal consolidation programs. It was not really finding solutions, which you needed huge investments into things like railways. I mean, can you imagine the value that will be added to the sub-Saharan African economy if you have a railway, for example, that connects all the way from Gambia up until Cameroon? You know the volume of trade that will add? You know the number of barriers that will be broken? This is just a geopolitical thing. The Chinese have made us understand in the past 5 or 10 years that if Africa is to develop, infrastructure investment is the way to go. And the multilateral institutions from the West, of which Obama's country is a big part of, never really thought about this. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, it was not part of their strategy. And so the Chinese are beginning to come to the party, and I think that is what is moving the US and some other Western countries to equally start thinking along those lines. Otherwise, trade and businesses they had in Africa, they're going to lose them. When they had that US-Africa summit, I mean, you could see clear strategies that was being put out in areas like energy, for example, which he clearly mentions. Okay, we can't have that industrial hub in Africa we're looking for if we don't have sound investments in energy, if we don't have sound investments in railways, for example. Go to the West today, people can travel from Italy and go to other European countries, either by railway or by metros. We don't have these in Africa.
Okay, now
we want to add value to our economy.
Right, let's shift focus, and we are wrapping up on this point. He said also something very interesting about the youth in Africa. He says, ultimately, the most powerful antidote to the old ways of doing things is this new generation generation of African youth. He says history shows that the nations that do not best, who do best, the nations that do best are the ones that invest in the education of their people. And he says, you see, in this information age, jobs can flow anywhere, and they typically will flow to where workers are literate and highly skilled and online. And Africa's young people are ready to compete. And he says he's met them. He said they are hungry, but they are eager, and they are very willing to work hard. And so we've got to invest in them. So he talks a lot about that. And earlier he had held an entrepreneurship summit, as well. And so all of these things, bringing them all together, what do you think he sees of the African new generation?
Well, clearly, Africa has got a demographic dividend, if I can say that.
Yeah.
If you look at China today, China has been able to do exceedingly well because they had a very youthful population 30 years ago that worked themselves off. Today they are part of the generation that is just facing out, and people are even concerned about the numbers that you have that are going to be depending on the state. And so any country or any jurisdiction or any continent that enjoys that demographic dividend today is going to do it. Is going to do exceptionally over the next, say, 20, 25 years, which is what makes Africa one of the most important places that will contribute or shape the global agenda in terms of economic development if we harness the talents that we have in the youth. But when Obama says the focus on education necessarily would translate in some kind of economic development, I want to tell him that 92% of Zimbabweans are literate. They're educated, but go to Zimbabwe, okay? So, I understand the point in education. People have got to participate in governance. People have to participate in democracy. People have to participate in socioeconomic development. All of these will add up and at least change mindset to engender that development, that economic development that we're looking for. Otherwise, we are going to be in serious trouble. But that is not the only point that we should be concerned about, okay? We need to create that enabling environment, which is what makes that his position on that entrepreneurship summit quite instrumental for me, because we have information, communication, and technology that is developing, and if Africa should take a huge part in the global agenda, I think we should focus on these things, because ICT and technology essentially is transforming various forms of our social and economic lives. If you go to a place like Kenya now, you have people doing exciting things with information technology that I feel will open up certain parts of the African economy. And so that he's spot on. But when you have a population with over 60% below 24 years, and you're not creating the enabling environment for individuals to do business, you have a serious crisis on your hand. Because those people either depend on the state. If they don't depend on the state, they become social deviants, because somebody has got to survive some way, somehow. We have seen the increase in terrorist activities, for example, which I didn't see his communication on that too clear. I would have loved to see that. I would have loved to see his views on what was happening, for example, in Libya, because clearly they also had a hand some way, somehow, in the developments in Libya. And so his point about the youth, really, we all agree that if you look at Africa today, we have a certain demographic dividend that we have to capitalize on. If you go to every single African country today, it is most likely that you're going to find about 50% of that population being below age 24. And it is even scary when you balance that, if you balance that against the growth in population, where some of them you have averaging about 2.73% per annum growth, that's scary. And we are not creating the economic goods that will support them. And so education for me is key. Creating the enabling environment for people to do business as well is key, and that enabling environment is a huge monster. If we want to disintegrate and open that, issues of governance, ease of doing business, the regulatory regimes that we have for protecting businesses, access to credit, because the majority of the businesses that we have in Africa are all small scale. And so if I'm small scale, to what extent is the financial system we have in Africa providing that ambience that supports me to get access to credit to do business? We have a huge market in Africa, 900 million people. That's a huge market. The US is just about 350 million. This is 900 million. And so African leaders have to start cracking up the coconut to know that we have the market here. Okay? Where do we have our advantages the most? We should stop this thinking about creating goods, primary goods for export. Every African country is talking about the imbalances they have within the economy, thinking about agricultural productivity that's decreased. You have global commodity prices that's down. I agree that affects everybody. There are external shocks that affects everybody. But if you identify where your strengths are, if we decide, for example, to start adding value to our products, what it means is that we'll have to think about industrialization. And so if you produce the cocoa and you don't want to export the cocoa and its beans, where you get less value, but you want to produce a chocolate, then you need a chocolate factory. That chocolate factory is going to operate on energy. So you need to fix energy. How do you fix energy? Can you put your synergies together as countries, build sustainable and renewable energies? Because we have lots of sunshine in Africa, for example. Can we think around solar technologies that supports us? Can we leverage, for example, on the volume of resources that we have here in Nigeria?
A lot of issues.
Okay. These are
lots
all
of issues
that I think we should discuss and put them in right context if Africa should develop.
Of course we will. And let me just quote the very last paragraph of Obama's speech. He says, "I am hopeful, and as I prepare to return home, my thoughts are with that same young man from Senegal who said," and he's quoting, "Here I have met Africa. That's the Africa I've always believed in. She is beautiful and young, full of talent and motivation and ambition." And to which I would simply add, as you build the Africa you believe in, you will have no better partner, no better friend than the United States of America. And so that's how he ended his speech to the African Union. And that's how we also end our program here tonight. This has been Worldview, where we actually tell you the African story, the context of world affairs. And this evening, we've been pleased to have Iribad Ibrahim, an international news analyst, on the line to give us some overview of the speech by Obama. And then Patrick Stevenson has also been here to give us some analysis of some issues. He's a policy analyst, and so he was talking a lot of policy stuff. Thank you so much for your time, also at home, and be here again same time next week. Bye for now.